Thanks everybody for joining today. We have a joint webinar between Kaizen Technologies and PowerSyncPro. We're going to cover tenant-to-tenant migrations with our experts, both Marshall and Tuan, who we'll introduce here in just a moment. If you have questions, feel free to post them into the chat window. We'll try to answer some of them on the fly, or maybe even wait until the webinar is concluded. But your interaction is appreciated. So, Marshall, let's go to the next slide and kick this off and go through the agenda. We're going to first introduce our tenant-to-tenant migration experts here. We're going to really talk about their experiences and some of the challenges of moving workstations. We're going to talk about scaling workstation modes with full visibility. Tuan will actually run a PowerSyncPro Workstation migration demonstration, and then go through some of the key advantages of using this software and the approach. And of course, we'll have the Q&A at the end. So just to get things started, let's have both Marshall and Tuan introduce themselves. So Marshall Ross, why don't you just give a quick introduction of who you are and your past experience in the migration space.
Yeah, so my name's Marshall Ross. I'm a solution architect lead here at Kaizen. I've been with Kaizen for over 10 years now. And the group that I'm responsible for at Kaizen mainly focuses on providing a holistic solution across multiple pillars of the Microsoft technology. So basically, we're involved with a lot of the pre-sales tech support, and then, developing the customer needs into statements of work beyond that. I also am very heavily involved with our mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures group, which is essentially the group at Kaizen that handles many of our tenant-to-tenant migrations. Tuan?
Thank you, Marshall. Yeah, Tuan Van Beers. So I started this journey in the Microsoft stack back in the 1990s, around 93, 94. I've been in MCC since 95 and started migrating people to the cloud back in 2009, and then tenant-to-tenant migrations kind of kicked in a couple of years later. I developed the original version of this tool back in 2018, 2019, around the Christmas period. And it was originally an internal tool, but we've kind of made it its own product now, and using it at partners to migrate people between tenants or between Active Directories.
Thanks, guys. That's a ton of experience that both of you guys have really had. I bet you've seen it all. Maybe we start this off, Marshall, with you. Can you offer a brief overview of all the experiences and things you've seen out there? I'm sure you've seen pretty much everything, right? Especially when it comes to tenant-to-tenant migrations.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of as Tuan was alluding to there, a lot of my experience with tenant-to-tenant migrations actually started back with the BPOS days, right? So I'm sure everybody on this call remembers BPOS, Microsoft's, first kind of public cloud offering, which was essentially Exchange 2007 in the cloud, with a sprinkling of a little bit of OCS, LCS in there as well as it got going. I remember doing a couple of my first tenant-to-tenant migrations actually in the BPOS days, and where we started, was essentially PST migrations and in very crude ways of shifting people from one tenant to another, using, very crude scripts and other things to kind of get people from point A to point B. I remember using EWS, DLLs to try to get people a little bit more automated. I'm sure, Tuan can remember those days of trying to throw together, scripts on the fly.
Yeah, build it as you go. That's right.
Yeah.
And then on those days, things were a lot simpler as well, weren't they? There weren't so many products out there in the cloud.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, again, as we've seen the ecosystem evolve, right, these crude scripts and things that we've developed around the platform have morphed into full-blown AIs with, real easy data migration capabilities. A lot of products offer those kind of services. And along the way, we've seen, like Tuan said, this evolution of the workstation, right? Before we only had to deal with Outlook, and it was a pretty simple process, pushing a new profile to a machine, right? We had tools to do those kind of things, and the user experience was often very simplistic. And again, as Tuan said, now we see this evolution of products. Right now, OneDrive's here, now Teams is here. All these other pieces at the surface on a workstation have started to come into play and kind of play into this end user experience. That doesn't even account for all the underlying pieces in the workstation now as well. Things like connected accounts, single sign-on, and all these other options that Microsoft has come out with. So again, as we evolve this landscape with workstations, we're kind of left with this problem now. The third-party vendors, the people that we rely on to do tenant-to-tenant data migrations, have had a limited success with tools previously, right? They've had some very basic reconfiguration software that we've been able to take advantage of. But again, that reconfiguration software is very limited in the scope that it can do, right? Mainly it's focused on reconfiguring an Outlook profile for a user, which is great. It's all well and good, but it doesn't capture the entire scenario, right? It doesn't capture how we reconfigure OneDrive, how we clear out the Teams cache and do all these other things to disassociate that workstation from that source tenant as we're going through migrations. So again, current state that we are at today now, kind of a fun fact for you guys. From a workstation perspective, there's over 25 registry hives that control or that contain over 150 keys that directly impact the way a workstation talks to Office 365. Right. So let that sink in a little bit, that's how ingrained these things are now in the OS. And it's not just as simple as clearing registry keys, right? That would be pretty simple, but there's a lot more files. There's a lot of things that we can, that we need to take into account as part of these workstation migrations. So how do we go ahead, Tuan, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think also, whilst we started with email, that was a little bit more asynchronous. It didn't matter if you waited a few minutes for the email to arrive again. But with the advent of Teams and chat, people kind of expect the more instant and the more seamless experience, which is kind of, that's where we're trying to drive to, is to make that experience more seamless for the users.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, your tenant-to-tenant migrations are ultimately measured by the end user experience, right? We can all have successful data migrations. We can all, rest easy with that piece of it. But if you have a poor user experience, that's what bubbles up, right? That's what bubbles up to the director, the C-level suite people that really don't care about anything else except for the fact that, well, you told me that we'd be done by X day, but here we are. Our users still can't work because their workstations aren't configured. And I'm sure between Tuan and I, we could probably tell you horror stories about, staying up until, 3 or 4 in the morning, RDPing into machines, trying to run, some scripts to clear those out, right? So that's led into, I think, Tuan, that's led into the development of this product.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of came about. We did a large 15,500 user cutover on a weekend with about 80 different domains that had to be all moved. So it was a full-on weekend, and as painful as that was, come Monday morning, the users obviously had their instructions of what to do. But like you say, managing that across that large an estate was hard work for that first week or two. So that's why we developed PowerSyncPro to help with that process, to kind of make it easier for the user to get started on day one. As Marshall said, the data migration tools have come a long way, and they're generally almost treated like utility when you're talking about the SharePoint, OneDrive, now Teams and Mail workloads. But the workstation side kind of has been a bit neglected. So that's where we're trying to focus the attention here, is to make that as nice an experience for the user as possible.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into, wouldn't it be nice to have a tool, as Tuan said, that is a utility, right? It's developed, it's supported, and it works with all of the things that we expect it to do, especially as we, expect our data migrations to go, right? We don't expect there to be fidelity loss. We don't expect there to be a lot of things. We needed a tool that can do the same thing for a workstation. So enter, PowerSyncPro, the development here, and what it can do to streamline these kind of migrations, right? And again, things like reconfiguring desktop applications are a huge piece of this puzzle. When we go in and do these tenant-to-tenant migrations, that's often the most asked for feature, is how are we going to clear these things in an effective way while still having, visibility into how things are running.
Yeah, exactly. And the central status, being able to see what's happening and which machines are having issues, that was the thing that we kind of overlooked to begin with. We effectively had a script that you deployed, and it ran on the workstations at a certain time. But then we found, okay, if there was any issue with that script, that potentially the user can't communicate, you've taken them off the places where they can communicate, and they have to revert to phone. So that's when we added in the kind of centralized ability to control what's going on, but also to report back. So the machines report back their progress. You can see which machines are advancing through. And if there are issues with the device, for example, WMI's got corrupted and we can't do a particular task, that bubbles up to the console as well. And you can kind of react to that before the user has to come to the help desk. As you'll see, a lot of it also runs without the user being present. So when we're talking about automation, we're not expecting the user to have to sit there and watch the migration or start the migration or interact with the migration. The expectation is that once they've got their machine left turned on, or they turn it on after the cutover date, then the machine just migrates itself. They go and get a coffee and they come back and they can log in, and they'll be able to sign into their apps on the new tenant.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to kind of underscore the fact that, we've alluded to it earlier, but the fact that this tool was built out of experience, right? As Tuan said, the original scripts were developed in 2018. We're in 2024 now. So the evolution of this tool has been long coming. This is not just something that's been dreamed up overnight and ran on a few machines. This is something that's been tested on thousands of machines and many different environments. So being able to kind of rely on that as we do our data vendors is very important, right? You want a trusted solution that's going to actually do what it says or do what it's advertised to be doing. So how do we prepare for that? How do we get to the point where, we need to be ready for a migration, right? Obviously, a lot of planning goes into something like this. This is not something that is installed and ran overnight, right? There are a lot of planning steps that go along with this, and essentially it starts with identification, right? So identification of the workstations that are going to be in scope for the migration. We oftentimes go into clients and they don't really know exactly what the scope is for the migration, but they have a pretty good idea, right? So we start with this 80% rule and we start planning for those machines. We look at the operating systems, we look at the applications that are in use by the users, and start planning our migration strategy around them, right? And this migration strategy may be different for certain sets of machines, right? The strategy for, a C-suite person is, may be different than a knowledge worker, right? So as part of this planning and part of this testing, we want to develop these user personas, and we want to make sure that we're testing these user personas in an effective way. So as Tuan said, on this migration cutover, this migration wave that we're attempting, the user can really go get a coffee, come back 10 minutes later, and they're working just like they normally would. All that to say, as we come through this, right, the end state goal is to automate all of these functions, right? We don't want to have anybody that's having to go out and run the scripts. We don't want to have, a lot of users calling the help desk saying, hey, my migration hasn't run X, what do I need to do? And that's really where a lot of this centralization, automation, and monitoring will come into it. And as you'll see, like Tuan will demo some of this stuff in the tool, but it really makes it holistic, right? And it makes it what we consider a full-featured workstation migration tool, right? We're going to help you guys from end to end do these migrations, coincide with the data migrations, and ultimately try to leave you guys with the best experience. And I think that's really the underscore here.
Yeah, exactly, Marshall. And we've said some of these points already, that our big aim is to automate as much as possible and to take as much of the end user pain away from the migration. So automation is key, and doing that at scale. So it's fine having something that runs for 10 or 100 machines, but the largest single migration we've done is 9,000 workstations in a weekend. And then later last year we did 18,000 over 4 consecutive waves, so 2 weeks apart. So we know the tool works at scale, and it helps the user to get started on that first day. Some things that were important to us, like I mentioned, the central tracking, being able to see what's going on with the migration, which workstations have reported and what they're doing, etc. But also being able to extend the process. So we've got a pre and post migration endpoint or script that you can add, so you can do things that are unique to that customer, or that there is a new feature that's come out that we aren't yet supporting natively in the tool, but you can extend the tool to do that. Someone asked about EMS and DLP. There'll be things we can do there, even if the tool doesn't support it natively, to just find out the scripting and then use the scripting to run that at migration time.
Yeah, and that extensibility in the scripting is funny, because we just ran into a similar problem with everybody starting to use the new Outlook, right? And people are switching over to the new Outlook, and there's a different way that has to be handled from a migration perspective. It doesn't rely on the same process as the old Outlook. So being able to add that script in there on the fly, test it, and then push it out is just an amazing feature, I think, because we run into these solutions or these problems all the time with Microsoft dropping random updates that people can now click a button, and with Office on the web, they just get the new feature. So
yes, often sometimes Microsoft actually forget to tell users, the tenant admins, that there's a new feature coming. The first time you hear about it is if there's a help desk ticket about that feature. You go,
absolutely.
What? Haven't heard about that one before.
And the best time to hear about it is during a migration, right? When they're sliding into a new tenant.
Yes,
cool.
Exactly.
So I think at this point, what we'll want to do, Tuan, I think we'll do a quick demo for you guys, just so you can kind of see the tool in action, and then we'll reconvene right after that. So go ahead, Tuan.
Thank you. Yes. So the PowerSyncPro backend tool runs on a Windows server. As long as it's a supported Windows version, it's okay. We use .NET Core as the foundation for what we do. It runs as a web service, as you can see. And for us, there are 2 main elements to it. There's a synchronization part, so being able to synchronize users between Active Directory, Azure AD, or even Google, as well as groups and contacts. But for this webinar, we're really more focused on the migration agent side. So this is the sync service where we have synchronization profiles and set up the schedule gets set up for you. But for this webinar, we're really talking about the migration agent. Now, the migration agent, as I said, it's an MSI installer, something that gets pushed to every machine using whatever software distribution tool you have. You pass it a couple of parameters, mainly the URL where the agent needs to come back to, and a pre-shared key. The pre-shared key is generated when you actually create one here. This is used for end-to-end encryption, so we actually encrypt the channel between every migration agent, just to make sure that nothing else can interfere with what's going on during this migration process. Then we have the concept of runbooks. So runbooks tell the migration agent what to do. So in this case here, we've got tenant-to-tenant migration using the control validation or cloud domain join keys to basically take a machine that's hybrid joined in one tenant and hybrid join them to another tenant. So leaving them in the same Active Directory, but switching the hybrid join. The main part of this is down the bottom here, the 5 tabs. The first tab is about just startup. So are we going to show any progress to the user? Because there may be some steps that you actually want to run silently. For example, you might want to run a script that does something ahead of migration, a few days ahead or weeks ahead, but you don't need to notify the user. You just let it run in the background. And we currently use a provisioning package to change the lock screen background so that people know a migration is in progress. And in the case of going from Active Directory to Azure AD, we often recommend putting a local admin account in that package. So in case something happens between disjoining AD and joining Azure AD, you've got a way back in. We are replacing the provisioning package, so in the next version you actually won't see that. You'll just see individual fields for the username and password and the actual background. And the other parameter here is that command package. I'll come back, or I'll show this command package when we look at the completion one as well, because I know there's one set up for this. And this is a zip file. It can have multiple files inside it that you need to run your scripts. Whether it's small amounts of software or other scripts that you've downloaded from the internet to do something, you can kind of chain them together inside that zip file. Device state. So this is talking about, okay, the machine is joined this way before migration, and you define how you want to join it after migration. So in this case, we've got an Active Directory join device that's hybrid joined, so we want to remove it from Azure AD. We don't need to join it to anything forcibly, so we don't need to join it to Azure AD because we're not joining it. But we do set these control validation keys. So these are 2 keys that you can set even when you've got Azure AD Connect syncing device to the source tenant, and devices automatically enrolling in joining the source tenant. We can, at the same time, in that same Active Directory, join the devices to the target tenant. So you'd set up Azure AD Connect to sync the devices from the Active Directory to both source and target tenant, and then we can hybrid join between the 2. Permission updates is more when you're doing Active Directory to Active Directory or Active Directory to Azure, where you repermission things on the machine. So Windows profiles, the file system as a whole, the registry, groups, etc. We are adding support for server migration to do basic server migrations like a standalone SQL Server or standalone IS server. So that's why there's some buttons there as well. And we're also adding the ability to do a remote file share migration so that a NAS device can get repermissioned as part of the process as well. For the scenario we're talking about here, the main goal here is the repermissioning or the reconfiguration of applications. So we've got a variety of applications that we support. So Outlook being one. Obviously, like Marshall said, it's effectively putting a new profile on the Outlook client, and you can choose to set the zero config change key, to control whether the user sees the startup wizard. Other M365 apps, so that's Office, Activation, OneNote, those two main products. The Edge browser, there's cases where when you migrate a device that actually the Edge browser doesn't allow you to sign out. So we actually make sure that the user can sign out and sign back in with the new credentials. Making OneDrive cloud files cloud only and the OneDrive for Business, that go in hand. We, as part of this tool, we remove the OneDrive profile for the source tenant, and then get the OneDrive client ready to start on the new tenant. And as part of that, we prefer to make all the existing OneDrive files cloud only, so that when we remove the source tenant, all the stubs kind of nicely go away. Any files that haven't been able to be synced, we will make sure they're copied to the target folder name that you see there. And then when the new OneDrive for Business client starts up again, it will pick up that folder, and you can sync the files that have been synchronized by the data migration tool back to the device. The last one is an edge case. So we do support Azure Information Protection, where you're asking Microsoft to migrate the entire key from tenant to tenant, or where you just want to bootstrap the AIP client on the device. So this would bootstrap it so that it gets the new policies from the target tenant. Then the last tab in this configuration is mostly around the command package, really. The set proxy order detect. There was one client who found that actually after migration they had to turn that order detect off, and they didn't have any way to do it, and we didn't at that time have the command package, so we just added a setting for them just to turn that off. So we are quite responsive. So if there is a feature that you need or that's desired, if it's something easy to do, we'll just put it in. If it's something more complicated, we'll obviously talk to you about how we can achieve that goal. And you can uninstall the agent altogether, so the tool can kind of self-destruct. Usually we recommend not doing that at the same time as migration, because you don't get the last set of reports back into the server. But some people don't have a software distribution tool on the target, so they want a way to get rid of PSP when it's all finished. So this is describing what will happen, and then batches describe when it will happen and to what devices it will happen. So in this case, I did it in the tenant-to-tenant batch, where we've got two runbooks. There's the prerequisites runbook, which is just making files cloud only. I haven't shown you that one. And the tenant-to-tenant using CDJ is the one we just looked at. You can make the profiles available versus forcibly starting them. So available means that the user gets a pop-up after that time to say, hey, you're okay to migrate now when you want. And you can start the migration when it suits you. Doesn't work so well for tenant-to-tenant, but for Active Directory or AD to Azure AD, it allows you to have a longer period of time where the users kind of self-migrate rather than you forcing a timetable on them. In terms of who's migrating, we do at the moment have the concept of users, but we are going to remove that. The idea here was that you can say which users you want to migrate, and it will migrate any workstation that has a Windows profile for that user on it. But in reality, we found that to be a little bit dangerous when you've got IT folks who log onto a large number of machines. So what we will retain is the ability to choose which computers you want to migrate to. And we've added a harvesting feature where it harvests the user profiles that are on the machine, and we display that as a report. So in here, we've got a user profile report, and you can actually see, I've only got one workstation, but you can see that this user Joe Blogs has a profile on that machine, and they last logged on the 14th of February. So we can use that information to kind of work out, okay, well, which users are using which machines, which actually isn't always that simple. to get out of an organization, especially as they're larger. They don't often have detailed record of who owns what machine or who's actually using the machine. When the migration starts, the key thing that you want to then look at is the agent progress. So this just tells us at a high level, okay, we've got a certain number of machines in the batch and how many machines have completed, no agent at the moment have an error or haven't started. And we can drill down for these. So this one here, it's the one that we're doing. You can see that at a high level, okay, this machine has finished all of its steps. It's good to go. It doesn't have any issues. And you can drill down further. So you can drill down into the agent log where you can actually see each of the steps that have happened on that machine. You don't have to go through that process, of course. You can come directly to the logs and do your filtering yourselves to get that information. Just going to check the questions. If anyone's got any questions on this side of the tool, so the controlling side or the monitoring side, please feel free to put them in the chat. One other thing that we added that was quite useful is failed communication. So these are agents that have been installed, but we're not expecting them to be there. So either it's a machine that is sharing the same name as another machine, so there's a duplicate for some reason, or the machine that is trying to get onto the console actually isn't in a domain that we're trying to migrate. So we kind of, any issues like that where the device is able to talk to the service, but the service is not expecting them, we kind of log here so you can see what's going on with those machines. Someone's asking about the slide deck. So, okay. What's the other question here? We've gone through multi-vendor solution. Okay. The other thing I wanted to just show, so I've migrated that machine, the Windows 10 Workstation Demo 1 machine, and just to show you what it looks like from a user's point of view when they log on after migration. So this machine has already gone through the process, and this user, Joe Blogs, because we're not taking the domain over in this case, I've updated his UPN in the source ID to now match what the target tenant says it should be. So if I log in,
we do have another question, Tuan, in chat.
Yep.
Cliff Embry asks, can I get documentation on how the AIP label migration?
Yep. Yeah, we can do that. And when you say label migration, so we don't do the migration of the labels at the back end, but once the labels have been migrated, especially if you're doing a whole tenant migration, you can work with Microsoft to get the key transferred from the source tenant to the target and then rekeyed in the target, so that anything that was protected with the old key can still be decrypted if you've just migrated the content in an encrypted state. Some tools do offer a decryption and re-encryption capability, but there's not that many that do that. So for us, yeah, it was around making sure that after migration, that encrypted content was able to be consumed by the clients, and that the clients would get the new policies, so they're not in a state where they think they've got the policies and what they need, the tags, but they actually go and get them again. Right, so this user signed in, so there's a positive confirmation that the migration is completed for them. We are adding a ability to have a QR code there so that the user could scan it with their phone and go to a site that has the follow-up instructions, so you don't have to necessarily deploy them. So yeah, they click OK. So this is Teams. Do you want to continue as the target user now? Signing in, password. It's the same password because I know I've synced it with PowerSyncPro. Okay, so it's asking me, so because I've already set up the user in advance, I'd set up MFA for this user. should be a text coming through. There it is. 9889 298 I9. So that's Teams. And I'll click on Outlook. There, that's Teams trying to go back to legacy client. I want to switch now. Outlook. Searching for accounts. While that's doing, I'll just go to OneDrive. Sign in. And I have to remember what his path, his username was, Joe.
See, this is the problem that we run into. Users don't read the instructions and they put in their old email addresses, and they, so this piece of it is very important, that there are clear instructions available to the user, right, post migration, right? It's not a just sign in and everything is done, right? With all the modern auth and application configuration, it can't be automated in that fashion.
Yeah. PSP demo target. Okay. Oops. Sorry. At PSP demo target.PowerSyncPro.com. Should have put it on the clipboard before. And OneDrive was the other one. With your email address. Sign in.
All of our security experts on the phone are kicking themselves for the SMS sign-in for MFA.
Yeah, no,
right now.
I didn't set up the ping app notification. There you go. Next. Up. Next. So you can get rid of this using the the silent config for Teams, or OneDrive, sorry. And the same with this one. You can get rid of that one as well with the zero config. On second 2. You can see OneDrive is up to date in the back, so it's synced the content back, and that's done. So Outlook will open up as well. And mail will come in. So they're kind of back in their working state now, where Teams, Outlook, Office obviously, and OneDrive have all been configured, and they're up and running.
Perfect.
Yeah, so any questions, anything you want me to show on that?
No, we have some other questions, Tuan, but maybe we send it back over to Marshall to tie this up, and then I'll flip a question or two over. And
okay,
we're 40 minutes past the hour, so I want to keep everybody all day. So Marshall, why don't you jump in and start wrapping this up?
Yeah. So again, just to wrap up, right? The key advantages to using this application, right? Total control. We can reduce downtime for end users, and really just to focus on the bottom 3 points there. The installation of this tool is incredibly simple, right? It's an MSI install. You guys can see the total package from a single console, and able to access that essentially from any device. So it's, again, a very powerful tool. It's can be used, obviously, as Tuan showed, outside of even tenant-to-tenant migrations, right? This is a extensible tool. Obviously, we're focused on just tenant-to-tenant here, but the amount of things that this tool can do are really, really quite amazing. And that's really what we have today. So we would welcome any questions that you guys have, and we can provide some answers.
Yeah, we have one question. Anyone else who wants to put it into the chat window, we can. The first one is just to kick this off. How do you deal with workstations that are remote or offline at the time of cutover?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. So we usually make sure that the PowerSyncPro server is accessible over the internet, and it can be locked down to a particular subpath in the URL. And of course, we've got the end-to-end encryption between each client and the service. So each client has its own certificate that it generates and secures that traffic. So as long as the user's on the internet, they don't need to be on the corporate network. Now, there's obviously exceptions to that if you want to do an online AD to AD migration, but for AD to Azure or an offline domain join, you don't need to be on the target. In terms of what happens when a user's got their machine off, so say they're on leave for some reason or sick, when they come back after their period of leave, when they boot up the machine, the agent will realize, oh, I've missed my migration window, I should have migrated, and it will inform the user. So the user will be given an hour countdown where they can continue work or they can save their work, and then the migration will kick in. They'll get reminded periodically, but then when the migration kicks in, again, the user's notified that the migration is in progress, and once the machine goes back to their normal reboot state, then they can log back in, and they're in the same place as all the other people who did migrate.
Perfect. Yep. So another question in chat, product pricing per seat, how is it broken down?
Yeah, so we try to keep the pricing quite simple. So if you're doing sync, where you're actually creating users, groups, or contacts, then that's priced on a per user basis. And for the migration agent, it's just per device. So if you have 10 people sharing a device, it's still just one device.
Perfect. What else do we have in check? Carl, do you have another one?
Yep, I got one more. Hold on one second. It is, can we move from one MDM solution to another as part of the cutoff?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, we have migrated people who are either SCCM config manager managed or in a co-managed state in the source, and they wanted to just become Intune managed in the target. For other MDM solutions, as long as we know how to get them out of the MDM solution, so that there's a script we can run on the workstation, then we can take them out of that side and then let them join on the target side. So yes, we can support devices going from one MDM to another MDM.
Cool. Yeah, and then I know this one is one that gets asked quite often, but what are the levels of success that we expect in terms of machines that trigger the agent, complete, error out? Do we have baselines and expectations around that?
Yeah, so far we've seen that in the larger migration we've done, it's in the high 90s, so 98, 99% of the machines kind of kick off their migration, and less than a percent of those actually have issues that need intervention. So it's not like some of the other tools where even the triggering on some of the tools we've used before was pretty hit and miss. In this case, if the agent's on the machine and it can talk to the server, then it will start the migration, and by far the majority of them will complete successfly. That does depend on testing, of course. You need to make sure that if you've got any endpoint protection, that the agent doesn't get pulled up by that for some reason. We have had it running with various endpoint protections like CrowdStrike, and we don't get caught by those in their default settings, but it's always worth making sure you've tested.
Big part of that is testing, for sure. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions in chat, so I'll go ahead and just wrap up as we complete this webinar. We truly appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to us and go through this solution with us. If you guys have any other questions that pop up, the email address that is shown on the screen would be the best place to start. And we'd absolutely love to hear more from you guys around that. So.
There's just one late question from Cliff. Sorry, Cliff, I remembered I was going to show the scripting side. Can we use custom scripts? Yes, you can. So there's both at the pre-migration stage and the post-migration stage. If I quickly slash the screen back briefly.
Sure.
Sorry, Marshall. So you effectively create a command line.cmd file that has whatever you want to call in there. And then in this case, we created a PowerShell script that just does a variety of things, pretty basic things on the machine. But you can do pretty much anything. And then these two files are just zipped up together into a single zip file, and then that's attached to the runbook. And the runbook will take that file, it will keep it in an encrypted state on the machine until it needs to run. Then it decompresses that and runs it in that directory, so you can refer to things, other assets in that directory using the / notation. And it will log every line of output as well. So every line it executes and every line of output. So again, you actually see what's going on inside that file.
Yeah, I think that wraps up and concludes the webinar. Thanks everybody, for attending the Kaizen PowerSyncPro webinar. Will be at it again in roughly 6 weeks. So expect to hear from us between now and then. So thank you for your attendance and your attention, and you'll hear from us soon. Take care.